welcome to Gaston Spotlight. I'm your host, Jordan Case, and I'm here with Lorenzo Steele. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Now, why did you create Behind These Prison Walls? What was the purpose?
The purpose of Behind These Prison Walls was it first started and it has actually evolved over a 30-year time period. I'm a former New York City Department Correction Officer. From 1987 to 1999, I worked in the nation's most violent adolescent jail on Rikers Island in New York City. And as a correction officer, I've seen a lot of traumatic events, trauma, and inhumane conditions that I knew about, and it just becomes a part of prison life. And I'm also a professional photographer. I picked up my first camera at 5 years old, and as a correction officer, I used to take my camera inside of the jail, taking pictures of common areas, and not knowing that after I would leave after 12 years of serving Rikers Island as a correction officer, those images will be used to help save thousands of individuals that didn't know the consequences of negative choices and decisions.
So you kind of just like led yourself down the path of just like helping out the community. But is there any more that helps the community that Prison Walls does?
There was an article that I did in a magazine called Don Diva. From that Don Diva magazine, they gave me about 5 or 6 pages of information along with the images. I had a sergeant in the police department that actually called me up and said, listen, I have some children that I feel that could use that information, possibly trying to keep them out of jail because they were at risk. He called me up. I went down to the school and actually did a presentation. I laminated the images, so they was 8 by 10. I put them on the blackboard at that time, and just showing them the realities of incarceration, because those individuals were in school, didn't take school serious. The ones getting suspended all the time in detention and things like that, not really knowing that there's a connection between low literacy and incarceration.
So you said you worked as an officer for 12 years at Rikers Island. How was your experience? Like, was it, because you said this was like the turning point of why you created Behind These Prison Walls. So I just want to know your experience.
That's a good question. I actually went from a correction officer and transformed into a prison reform advocate. And that process, not knowing the system, because at 22 years old, I became a correction officer in 1987. That time, you didn't have prison shows. No one in my family has ever been incarcerated. Nobody in my community, small community, Queens Village, New York. I didn't see the police until I left the neighborhood. So there was no interaction with the police at all. So becoming a correction officer, first I was a paraprofessional for the Board of Ed, teacher's aide, they call it in New York City. And I did that for 9 months. And then I had, I've taken the correction test, police test, failed the police, failed the fire, and I passed the correction test. Only reason I became a correction officer because they were paying more money at the time. Didn't know anything about jail at all. So 22 years old, 6'2", 159 pounds. It was like I was transported into a different world. At that time, I think the academy was 12 weeks in the academy. They was, supposedly trained you on how to be a correction officer. But once you set foot behind those walls for the first time as a new correction officer, almost 98% of what they taught you just goes out the window. You have to learn as you go. And as a correction officer, learn as you go, you want to gravitate to those individuals, the seasoned officers that could basically help you survive, what to do, what not to do. And, gravitated to those individuals that, were able to control a housing unit, meaning everyone is safe inside, making sure care, custody, and control, that the detainees were afforded that. And basically our job was just to make sure nobody got hurt. So imagine 22 years old and just going through that shock of seeing someone's face just cut with a razor blade and seeing the blood just gushing out. my first experience, I was almost in shock. But as a correction officer, you can't show fear. So even if you're like, oh my God, what just happened? You can't really show that. So you got to be the tough guy. That uniform is almost like your Superman cape. So you can be hurting inside, but you can't show that outside. So I'll never forget the first time I saw an adolescent, his face just cut wide open. And he said, get used to it. Rikers Island at that time was called the butcher shop, meaning someone was getting brutally harmed every single day.
Your experience, I love how it ties into what you do with Behind These Prison Walls.
It's all connected, and like I said, it's still evolving. And from doing that, feeling that I had to go into the schools to save individuals from going there, like I said, it evolved. It went from the caravan, but then as a visual artist, it kept growing. So the images, I had more images. I started creating installations showing you what the jail is like. And so I'm gonna need a bigger van.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need a bigger vehicle. And that was where the bus came into play. Okay. And so the bus, I retrofitted it. I did the walls, panels, painted it, and took those same pictures, installations, and put them on a bus. So now I have the first mobile prison art museum in America.
That's very cool. And I thank you for joining us today on Gaston Spotlight, hearing about what you do for the community and everything. It was very interesting. Thank you for joining us today on Gaston Spotlight. I've been your host, Jordan Case, and I hope to see you next time on Gaston Spotlight.